This is going to be one of the single most valuable videos in 40K you've ever watched. Let's jump right into this. In the meta, there are big bads. And if you watch our tier list, we talked about what we think are the best armies in the game right now. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. What we're going to be talking about today is we are discussing the concept of how to build your list in response to what you will see in tournaments. So the reality is, no matter where you're competing in the world, guys, you are going to see certain archetypes of armies, and you have to be prepared for those armies. And some of these armies will actually dramatically influence the way that you have to build your army list, but not all. So as I have written here, not every army's existence is going to influence how I'm going to build my army list. I personally don't think that I need to specifically make sure I have things to deal with Votann. Votann's a good army, it exists, it can cause problems for me, but I do not need to build an army that has tools specifically tailored towards beating Votann. It's not what I'm going to bring for singles. Some armies will have specific threats, and you will run into them, and you will lose because of it. Think of certain meta choices that have been previously in the edition, okay? You had to be able to handle certain units. When triple ACDC was going to be all the rage, you had to be able to handle triple ACDC. If you didn't, you were just doomed to lose if you ran into it. So the popularity of armies will influence what you need to prepare for. The raw strength of certain armies and units will help influence what you need to be prepared for. The commonality of how often you're going to see these specific unit combinations, etc., like that. So let's get into it. What are the big bads? We're also going to talk about how we're going to deal with the big bads. So what are the threats? Guys, I have identified 4 armies that I think specifically will influence the way that you need to build your army list. So these are the 4 threats, and I'm going to list why they are big threats. Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum, whatever you want to call them. Yes, they're probably the best army in the game. Why are they the best army in the game? Like, what is the specific thing which is going to be causing lots of trouble for us playing into them? First off, they're tanks. They've got durable, cheap tanks that shoot pretty dang hard. They have OC. They actually have the ability to steal objectives with OC because they can give extra OC in their command phase. They have a 3-inch deep stretch in the form of Aquilins, which are the most busted data sheet that we have seen in quite a while. They are bonkers good, and effectively every single top-level competitive Imperial Guard list, you're going to see 30, effectively 40, because they're going to resurrect one of the units as well. These guys have a 3-inch deep strike. They get to shoot when they land, and just as an aside, if they use their special ability to shoot their flamer when they land, they can't then throw grenades because they would have had shot. So just as a little side. And then they have tons of units. So these are very specific threats that you have to be prepared for. Nids. Tyranids are amazing, and one of the reasons why we have to prepare for Tyranids in our list building is this. They have a massive range advantage. They've got roughly the best anti-infantry long range in the game in the form of Exocrines. They also, I mean, if they took a Flame Effects, then they're going to have an amazing Overwatch potential and anti-infantry Flame Effects, but they're probably not. The effects are almost always going to be Rupture Effects with a big anti-tank shooting. But basically, they have massive, big, tough launchers, and a lot of them. They've got incredible screening, seeing as they can just have one Biovore drop a freaking Spore Mine anywhere on the battlefield every single turn, which can just screen out all of your Deep Strikers, your Rapid Aggressors, things like this. They have insanely efficient and good lone ops in the form of Lictors, and they've got fantastic anti-tank. They've got the Rupture Effects, which is going to be D6 plus 6 damage on its 2 big shots. Yes, it can be vulnerable to units that have like a 4 invulnerable save, but it is a very strong thing. So you have to account for this when you're building lists. Sisters, they are bunker busters. What do I mean by that? Well, they've got triple Exocrines, or sorry, not Exocrines. They've got triple Exorcist, and these tanks can just sit back and blow up something that they can't see. So they can actually just sit back and do whatever they want, and they can play a more passive game and force you to come to them, because if you just sit in your home field, they're going to end up killing you with those Exorcists, or you're going to have to pray that you get lucky and don't die from the Exorcists. So what that does is it forces you as their opponent to actually end up making the first moves and take the big risk. So they are bunker busters. They also have lots of very tough tanks. They've got the Castigators, those Exorcists. Even their Rhinos become very tough since they have the auto 6s for saves because they have the Miracle Dice mechanism. What the Miracle Dice mechanism does is it says, all right, Tyranids, where you have your unbelievably powerful like Tyrannofexes with the best anti-tank guns in the game, boom, your Tyrannofex shoots at my Rhino, and I happened to roll the first save, and it was a 6 up, so it's cool. Then I'm just going to take another Miracle Dice and put another 6 down, and then my Rhino takes 0 damage from you. So they are not necessarily affected by big anti-tank guns, because they can just Say no. Then they have massive mid-range damage with their ability to advance and shoot with all of their melta guns. They can also have the little scoot and shoot on, say, their, I think it's the Dominions is the one that scoots and shoots. Correct me if I said the wrong unit there, please. But if you end up within a certain end range of them, then they're just gonna hop back into the immolator, which means it's another really tough tank that they're gonna have to deal with. So they have lots of issues that you're gonna have to account for in your list building. Death Guard have a lot of problems as well. They are once again buster bunkers with those Plague Burst Crawlers and the addition of Mortarion, who lets you ignore modifiers, and then suddenly they are going to ignore cover, and then so you're going to actually be -1 your armor save, unless they also get you within contagion range, which they can by using like cultist shenanigans, like we talked about in one of our previous videos. So they can have their they can have their tank shooting with lethal hits with a guaranteed of AP2 where you can't armor contempt or anything against it. So they are bunker busters. They have got lots of very tough units. Even their fetid bloat drones are a toughness 9, and they all have like crazy anti-infantry 2-up flamers, and they're everywhere. Bloat drones, plague marines, freaking death shroud units, plague burst crawlers. They are gonna wreck every single infantry in the game. You're ignoring all your modifiers, and they're also going to fundamentally change your base defensive strats because you're going to be -1 armor save against them if they take that particular contagion. You're always going to be -1 toughness against them. It will change your base defensive stats. So these are the 3 big bads, and we got to figure out how we're going to account for them. Now, and why are these specific armies? Listen, guys, if you prep for Guard, Sisters, Tyranids, and Death Guard, you've more or less prepped for every other threat in the game as well. I don't necessarily think there are any other unique situations to prep for it. Maybe you could argue GSC, but the reality is that when you prep for Aquilans and fast skirmishing infantry, you're already prepped for handling the Biosantic situation where they just get to drop down and have all these charges into you, right? So if you're prepping for, if you want to prep for Imperial Knights, well, you've already done it because you already know that you have to handle the big Tyranid monsters. So you already have to bunker bust them. So you don't have to specifically plan for Imperial Knights, if you're getting what I'm saying, right? So you're already prepared for everything in the game if you are preparing for these 4 units, 4 armies. So now the question is, how do you deal with these armies? Here is a huge, huge thing. And I actually posted this question in my Discord, and we got some really good responses. Some of them were actually from Shetel, who is my my admin, who's brilliant with this game. And he had a really good little line of reasoning that just a great demonstration of how you can actually handle these things. So I'm kind of quoting him here, so shout out to him, okay? How do you deal with the problem? Not every army deals with problems the same way. Some armies, let's say we're playing into Tyranids and you're playing as Sisters of Battle. Your way of dealing with Tyranids might just be you're going to blast those freaking monsters down. Or if you're playing as Tyranids, your method of dealing with Sisters might just be I'm going to push through all of their invulnerable stages and I'm just going to blast them down. It is a very viable strategy. Let's take an army that can't necessarily do that. AdMech, for example. Everyone complains about AdMech not having options. AdMech have lots of options, guys. So here's the fun part about list building, and this is the quote I'm kind of butchering from Shetel, but it is just brilliantly. It's how do you handle these problems? So let's say AdMech is playing into Sisters, and they don't have the type of army that can just pop the Castigators and pop the Exorcists and pop the Rhinos even, or the Immolators, I mean. Well, what they're going to do instead is they're just going to tag everything with Ruststalkers and force you back into your deployment zone and never let you leave your deployment zone, and you're going to take 100% board control. And they can do it because Ruststalkers, they move 8, they disembark 3 inches, so it's an 11-inch disembark. They get +1 to advance or +2 if they're nearby, a friendly battle line unit, and then they get +1 to charge. +2 if it's near a friendly battle line unit, and since you have access to advance and charge, you can move these guys an astonishing distance. So that is going to be 11 +6 +2. So, oh my gosh, so that's going to be 19 inches of movement, and then you could be at charging at +2. It is insane how fast these guys can be. So they don't necessarily have to kill the tanks. So even if they don't have the ability to kill tanks, they can still stuff the tank so that the enemy cannot move forward. So there are different ways of responding to threats. Here's another example. Grey Knights. This was also taken from the Discord, guys. You should really be in the Discord, the members only Discord, because that's where we have these discussions. A lot of times we don't do these discussions in the free area, but sometimes we do as well. Grey Knights may respond by taking specific war gear. Even if they don't have varied units that they can take to respond to different situations, they have varied war gear. So for example, right now we're seeing a lot of Grey Knight players getting rid of all their side cannons and only taking the incinerators on their Terminators and on their Paladins. Why? Because the incinerators are freaking amazing. It's strength 6 AP1 that ignores cover. That is going to be more effective against tanks than a strength 8 AP1 not ignoring cover damage 2 gun, especially when you consider that it's auto hitting and you have access to Overwatch with it as well. Now, Grey Knights might not even they don't even need to change their build to deal with, say, hordes, for example. So if you really wanted to have to deal with a horde, I don't really think hordes are a problem in the meta right now, but if you think hordes are a problem in the meta right now, then you might want to know how you're going to deal with hordes. Well, Grey Knights don't need to change any of their units out. Maybe they just switch all of their war gear for incinerators instead of psi cannons. Now suddenly they've got a great anti-infantry gun that's going to overwatch with a great effect as well, and they are prepared for hordes. So there's lots of creative ways that you can prepare for these problems. Here's a couple other little issues that were raised in the Discord, and I just really want to shout out and thank those people for bringing these concerns so I can kind of discuss them right here. So this is coming from one of our users, Roke. The guy is an awesome person. I like him a lot, and he had a really fundamentally decent question. He goes, "Listen, I understand you want to deal with all the other big threats, but I play an army, and he when I say I mean him. Of course, I play orcs as well, but we're talking about Roke here. I main orcs, so while 2 Doom Scythes might be a budget mono for most, he meant monolith. So what that means is that they're just kind of a less good unit of the monolith, and most armies wouldn't be concerned about them. For me, it's 2 units that I can't realistically wipe. I can't hide from them. I can't block them. And they're just going to continuously pick up my bodies. I have no way to deal with them, so they are a big problem, and I might have to address that in list building. So to Roke, his basically fundamental question with this statement, in my opinion, is he's asking, how does he handle a threat that is a threat to him, but it's not a threat to anyone else? Well, here's the deal. You're going to have to ask yourself this in list building. Occasionally, your army is going to have a very specific weakness. Let's take anti-infantry flyers, for example. Not a big deal in the game, but against a infantry-style army like orcs, it might be a big issue. So you got to ask yourself, how likely are you to encounter this weakness in the wilds? So are you going to run into an army that is spamming these anti-infantry flyers? And if you are, how often is that going to happen? Is it going to happen once out of every 6 GTs? Because if it does, you might just accept that loss and move on. The other thing that you could do is how do you actually deal with that weakness? Can you, in your list building, eliminate that weakness? Because if you can't eliminate that weakness, I typically counsel people to not even bother dealing with the weakness. I find it's much better to put all of my points in my army into making my army's strengths better. If I can completely eliminate a weakness, I will. But if I can only kind of like make my weakness less weak, I don't bother with it. I find it detracts from the strength of the army. So if you have a specific weakness in your army, like Roke does with his orcs, Doom Scythes cause him problems. Well, the first question is it really a problem, or is it only a problem 1 out of every 20 games? If it's a problem 1 out of every 20 games, honestly, you might just accept you're going to lose that 1 game out of every 20, which is going to end up making you a much better army into literally everyone else. If it's something you're facing all the time, you might have to come up with very specific solutions. All right, and lastly, I've got one other thing that I kind of wanted to bring up here. And this is kind of making fun of another member of our Discord, but he 100% gave me permission to do this. So big shout out to Ian. He's a huge supporter. He's a rock star. And this is his question. He goes, well, listen, why do I need to plan for anything if I'm just going to table my opponent? And then what he did is he said, if people ask this question, perhaps you can just show my results at LGT. So this is Ian's results at LGT. He was number 605. He got a loss, a win, a loss, a win, a loss. So here's what happens. Sometimes you say, well, my game plan is to force everyone to react to me, which is true. And you might just want to go and murder people and murder people and murder people and say, when I do that, I don't really have to account for guard. I don't have to account for sisters. I don't have to account for NIDs. Here's the reality, though. That way of winning games just doesn't really work at a higher level when your opponents are playing tricky games. Because when you're playing at a higher level of competitive play, or even, honestly, a middle level of competitive play, you're no longer playing team deathmatch. And this is another quote from Shettel in the Discord. I think that's a common way to start out with Warhammer, basically playing team deathmatch, when you're actually playing Conquest or Search and Destroy. It doesn't matter how much you kill of your opponent if the last person manages to plant the bomb and defend it to the end. This is a great way to think about Warhammer 40,000 right now. It doesn't matter if you can kill almost everything. If your opponent still has the ability to outscore you, your game plan was not a good game plan, and it's going to force you to take a look at your list building. So guys, this is my guide to dealing with big bads, and really this is more or less the guide to recognizing what the big bads are and empowering you to come up with solutions to the big bads. So just in conclusion, the big bads, in my opinion, are going to be Guard, Nids, Sisters, and Death Guard. If there's another big bad that you think would influence your list building for singles, please pop it down below. We did have some users who mentioned that like demons will influence their list building. But these, in my opinion, these are the 4 that really influence the list building. If you can think of something else, I'm not saying nothing else is good. There's lots of other really good things in the meta, but these are the problems that I need to solve in order to have the highest success for me to do well in the meta. And I think it's going to be the same for pretty much everyone as well. If I missed something, type it down below. Guys, I love and I appreciate all of you. Until next time, happy crupping out. Bye-bye.